They say the sound of a heartbreaking is silent. But on the night of December 14, 1884, Emilia Vance's heart shattered so loudly it echoed through the history of London's elite. She stood alone in the center of the ballroom, shivering in a stained dress, while the man she loved laughed at her tears. The entire room mocked her poverty and her pain. But they didn't notice the shadow detaching itself from the wall. They didn't see the Duke of Ashcroft, a man rumored to have no soul, setting down his glass. Everyone laughed, until the Ruthless Duke took one step forward and the music stopped. This is the true story of how a girl with nothing brought an empire to its knees. The tragedy of Emilia Vance did not begin in a ballroom. It began in the dusty, sunlit corner of a library in the Sterling estate 6 months prior. Emilia was not of their world. She was the daughter of a disgraced solicitor, a man who had died, leaving behind nothing but debts and a gold pocket watch. At 22, Emilia had been reduced to the role of a paid companion to the Dowager Mrs. Sterling. It was a life of invisibility. She was expected to pour tea, mend lace, read aloud until her voice grew hoarse, and above all, never speak unless spoken to. But Julian Sterling had spoken to her. Julian was the golden son of the family, charming, handsome, and possessing a smile that seemed to promise a secret world where class distinctions did not exist. He was 25, the heir to a modest fortune, and the target of every ambitious mother in London. Yet, he found his way to the library where Emilia worked. "You read Plato?" he had asked that first afternoon, leaning against the oak doorframe, watching her dust the high shelves. Emilia had nearly dropped the book. I only look at the words, sir, to improve my vocabulary for your grandmother." "Don't lie to me, Emilia," he whispered, stepping closer. "I see you. I see the intelligence in your eyes. It's a waste to hide it." That was the trap. It wasn't money that seduced Emilia. It was the feeling of being seen. Over the summer months, a secret romance bloomed in the shadows of the estate. Stolen glances during dinner service, notes tucked inside hollowed-out books, and brief, trembling touches in the garden when the moon was hidden behind clouds. Julian made promises. He told her that he loathed the superficiality of high society. He told her that he wanted a wife with a soul, not just a dowry. He called Emilia his true north. "But your mother," Emilia had whispered one rainy afternoon in October, her hand resting on his chest. "Lady Sterling expects you to marry Beatrice Thorne. She has a title. She has land." Julian had laughed, a sound that Emilia would replay in her mind 1,000 times later. "Beatrice Thorne is a viper in silk. I would rather die than marry a woman so cruel. Trust me, Ellie, the winter ball is coming. I intend to make a statement. I will choose you, and damn the consequences." Emilia believed him. Why wouldn't she? She was young, lonely, and desperate for kindness. She did not know that Julian was not a rebel. He was a gambler, deep in debt to creditors in the East End, and he was a coward. She did not know that Beatrice Thorne, the wealthy, vindictive daughter of an earl, had already purchased his debts. The week before the winter ball, Beatrice had cornered Julian at a hunt. "I know about your little mouse," Beatrice had sneered, tapping her riding crop against Julian's boot. "The paid companion. It's pathetic, really." "It's not what you think," Julian stammered, sweating despite the cold. "I don't care what it is," Beatrice said, her eyes cold and hard like flint. "You owe my father £10,000. You can't pay it. But I can make the debt vanish. All you have to do is entertain me." "Entertain you?" "I'm bored, Julian. The season is dull. I want a spectacle at the winter ball. I want to see this little mouse crushed. Bring her to the ball. Make her think she belongs. And then, when she is at her highest point of hope, destroy her. Do this, and your debts are gone. Refuse, and you go to debtor's prison." Julian looked at the beautiful, cruel woman, and then he thought of Emilia's gentle eyes. It took him less than 10 seconds to decide. "What do you want me to do?" Julian asked. And so the stage was set. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, embossed with gold leaf. It was addressed solely to Miss Emilia Vance. Emilia held it with trembling hands. Mrs. Sterling was napping, and the house was quiet. Julian found her in the hallway, his face pale, but his smile fixed. "You did this?" she breathed. "I told you," Julian said, though he couldn't quite meet her eyes. "It's time we stopped hiding." Beatrice Thorne herself sent the invite. "She wants to make peace. She knows I love you." "But I have nothing to wear," Emilia panicked. "A ball of that magnitude. I cannot go in my gray wool." "I have taken care of it," Julian said. He produced a large box. Inside lay a dress that seemed woven from moonlight, a pale, shimmering blue silk. It was old-fashioned, perhaps 20 years out of style, but the fabric was exquisite. "It was my great-aunt's. It fits the theme. Vintage elegance. You will be the most beautiful woman there." Emilia wept with gratitude. She spent the next 3 nights altering the dress in secret, stitching her hopes into the hem. She didn't know the dress was chosen specifically because it was ridiculous, a relic that would make her stand out, like a sore thumb among the modern fashions of 1884. The night of the ball arrived. The venue was the Thorne Mansion, a sprawling palace of marble and velvet. As Emilia stepped out of the carriage, the cold London air bit at her exposed skin, but her heart was on fire. She took Julian's arm. He felt stiff, his muscles tense. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice tight. "With you, I am ready for anything," she replied. They ascended the grand staircase. The double doors swung open, and the roar of conversation hit them. Hundreds of London's wealthiest aristocrats were there. Diamonds sparkled under the massive crystal chandeliers. The air smelled of expensive perfume, beeswax, and champagne. When the footman announced, "Lord Julian Sterling and Miss Emilia Vance," the room did not go silent immediately. It was a slow wave of silence, a ripple of confusion that spread from the door outward. Heads turned. Lorgnettes were raised. Emilia felt the shift in the atmosphere. She had expected curiosity, perhaps some coldness. She was not expecting the snickers. "Look at her." A woman whispered loud enough to be heard. "Is she wearing a curtain?" "That cut hasn't been seen since the Queen's coronation." Another laughed. Emilia squeezed Julian's arm, looking for reassurance. But Julian pulled away slightly. "Wait here," he muttered. "I must find our hostess." "Julian, please don't leave me," she whispered, panic rising in her throat. "Stay here, Emilia. Do not embarrass me." He walked away, vanishing into the crowd, leaving her standing alone at the top of the stairs. The sea of faces below turned upward. They were sharks, and she was blood in the water. Then the crowd parted. Lady Beatrice Thorne approached. She was resplendent in crimson velvet, looking like a queen of blood and fire. She held a glass of dark red wine in her hand. "Well, well," Beatrice's voice carried across the room. "The little helper has arrived, and wearing that." The room erupted in tittering laughter. Emilia stood frozen, her hands clutching the skirt of the blue dress. "Lady Beatrice, Julian said. "Julian?" Beatrice laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. "Oh, you poor deluded thing. You thought he brought you here because he loves you." Beatrice turned to the crowd, raising her voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a thief in our midst." The laughter stopped. The accusation hung heavy in the air. "I am no thief," Emilia cried out, her voice trembling but clear. "Are you not?" Beatrice stepped closer. "Julian tells me that you have been stealing from the Sterling estate for months. Silver spoons, trinkets." and that he only brought you here tonight to expose you before the authorities arrive." "That's a lie." Emilia looked frantically for Julian. She spotted him, standing near a pillar, holding a glass of scotch. "Julian, tell them it's a lie." Julian Sterling looked at Emilia. He looked at the tears welling in her large brown eyes. He looked at the pleading desperation. Then he looked at Beatrice, who raised an eyebrow, reminding him of the debt. Julian took a sip of his drink, looked directly at Emilia, and said, loud enough for the room to hear, "I'm sorry, Emilia. I cannot protect you any more." "Give Lady Beatrice back her ring." Emilia felt the world tilt. "Ring? I have no ring." Beatrice stepped forward, her face mocking. "Let's see, shall we?" She reached out and grabbed Emilia's small, beaded purse, the only thing Emilia actually owned. She dumped the contents onto the floor, a handkerchief, a small mirror. And there, tumbling out with a metallic clatter, was a heavy diamond ring. Beatrice had planted it. Julian had let her. "A thief," Beatrice announced, kicking the purse away. "And a charity case trying to dress like a lady. You are nothing. You are dirt on the shoe of this family." "I didn't," Emilia gasped, the air leaving her lungs. "I didn't take it." "Get out," Beatrice hissed. "But first," Beatrice tilted her glass. The dark red wine cascaded down the front of Emilia's pale blue dress, staining the vintage silk like a fresh wound. The crowd roared with laughter. It was a sound of pure malice. Emilia stood there, the wine soaking into her skin, the man she loved avoiding her gaze, the woman who hated her smiling in triumph. She was shattered. She wished the floor would open up and swallow her whole. She turned to run, blinded by tears, but she collided with a hard, immovable wall of black wool. She gasped, looking up. Standing there, blocking her path, was a man who had not laughed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with hair as black as midnight, and eyes of piercing, icy gray. He wore the crest of the Ashcroft family. It was Sullivan Blackwood, the Duke. The room instantly fell silent. The laughter died in their throats. You did not laugh when Sullivan Blackwood was present. He was the wealthiest man in England, a man who owned half the railways and steel mills, a man known for ruining his enemies with a single signature. He was ruthless. He was cold. He was terrifying. He looked down at Emilia. She was trembling, wine dripping from her bodice, her face a mask of misery. "Your Grace," Beatrice said, her voice suddenly high and nervous, hurrying over. "Ignore her. She is just a servant caught stealing. We were just throwing her out." The Duke did not look at Beatrice. He did not look at the crowd. He kept his gray eyes locked on Emilia. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a pristine white silk handkerchief. He didn't hand it to her. He reached out and gently, with a tenderness that shocked the room, dabbed a drop of wine from her cheek. "I believe," the Duke said, his voice a deep baritone that vibrated through the floorboards, "that you have made a mistake, Lady Beatrice." "A mistake?" Beatrice faltered. She had my ring." "No," the Duke said, turning to face the room. His eyes swept over them like a winter storm. "She could not have stolen your ring." "And why is that, Your Grace?" Julian spoke up, trying to sound brave. The Duke looked at Julian with an expression of utter contempt. "Because," Sullivan lied smoothly, "Miss Vance has been in my employ for the last 3 months. She was with me this afternoon, and I do not employ thieves." A gasp went through the room. It was a lie. Emilia had never met him. Sullivan turned back to Emilia. He took off his heavy, fur-lined black coat and draped it over her shoulders, covering the stained dress. The warmth engulfed her, smelling of sandalwood and power. "Come with me, Miss Vance," Sullivan said, offering her his arm. "The air in here has become suddenly Toxic. Emilia looked at his arm. Then she looked at Julian, who stood open-mouthed. She looked at Beatrice, whose face was pale with rage. Emilia lifted her chin. She took the Duke's arm. "Thank you, Your Grace," she whispered. And as they walked out, the ruthless Duke of Ashcroft did something he had never done before. He stopped at the door, looked back at Julian Sterling, and said, "Pray, Mr. Sterling, pray that I do not decide to buy your debts by morning." Then he walked her out into the night, leaving the room in a chaos of whispers. The carriage ride away from the Thorne mansion was suffocatingly silent. The interior of the Duke's carriage was lined with black velvet, darker than the night outside, and the rhythmic clatter of the horses, hooves against the cobblestones of Mayfair, seemed to count down the seconds of Emilia's life. She sat huddled in the corner, still wrapped in Sullivan Blackwood's heavy coat. She was shivering, not from cold, but from the adrenaline crash. The shame burned her skin where the wine had touched it. Sullivan sat opposite her. He did not look at her. He was reading a ledger he had pulled from a compartment, utilizing the small oil lamp fixed to the wall. He seemed entirely unbothered by the fact that he had just declared war on a prominent family and kidnapped a disgraced woman. Where are you taking me?" Emilia asked, her voice cracking. "I have no money for a cab. If you could just drop me at St. Jude's shelter." Sullivan closed the ledger with a sharp snap. "St. Jude's? So you can be preyed upon by the wolves of the East End before dawn? Don't be foolish, Miss Vance. You are coming to Ashcroft Hall." "I cannot," she whispered. "You lied for me. You saved me. But I cannot accept your charity. I have my pride." "Pride?" Sullivan looked at her. Then, his eyes narrowing. "Pride is a luxury for those with bank accounts. Tonight you have no reputation, no employment, and no home." Julian Sterling saw to that. The mention of Julian's name made Emilia flinch as if struck. He had no choice. "He had a choice," Sullivan said, his voice dropping to a growl. "He chose his comfort over your dignity. He chose to let a woman he claimed to love be destroyed so he could avoid paying for his own mistakes. That is not a man. That is a parasite." The carriage slowed and turned through massive iron gates. Emilia looked out the window. Ashcroft Hall was not a house. It was a fortress of gray stone, imposing and severe, much like its master. When they entered the foyer, the staff was lined up. They did not gawk. They did not whisper. They stood at attention. "Mrs. Halloway." Sullivan addressed a stern-looking woman with silver hair tight in a bun. "Miss Vance will be staying in the blue suite. Draw her a bath. Burn that dress. And find her something to wear that doesn't smell of cheap wine and betrayal." "Yes, Your Grace." Emilia turned to him, desperate. Why are you doing this? Everyone says you are heartless. They call you the Ruthless Duke. Why save a nobody like me?" Sullivan paused at the foot of the stairs. He looked at her, and for a second the ice in his eyes thawed, revealing something ancient and weary. "Because, Miss Vance," he said softly, 10 years ago, the Thorne family spread a rumor about my younger sister that drove her to take her own life. I destroyed their shipping business last year. I intend to destroy the rest of their legacy this year. And you are the weapon I have been waiting for." He turned and walked away. "Sleep. Tomorrow, we work." Emilia stood there, stunned. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't a charity case. She was ammunition. And for the first time that night, she didn't feel weak. She felt a spark of anger ignite in her chest. If she was to be a weapon, she would be a sharp one. The transformation of Emilia Vance did not happen overnight. It was a grueling, painful process that took place over the cold winter months of 1885. The deal was simple. Sullivan would provide her with the means to live a life of independence and eventual wealth. In exchange, she would help him dismantle the social standing of the Sterling and Thorne families. She had to become someone else. The mouse had to die so the queen could rise. Her days began at 5 a.m. Sullivan was a demanding tutor. He did not teach her how to pour tea or curtsy. He claimed she already knew how to be submissive, and that was the problem. "Stand up," he commanded one morning in the library. Emilia was reading a report on the Thorne family's investments. "You are hunching. You look like you are apologizing for taking up space." "I am used to making myself small," she admitted. "Stop it," Sullivan ordered, walking around the desk. "When you walk into a room, you own the air in it. When you speak, you do not hope they listen. You expect it. Try again." They spent hours debating politics, philosophy, and economics. Sullivan discovered that Emilia had a brilliant mind for numbers, a skill wasted on a paid companion. She found errors in his railway ledgers that his own accountants had missed. "You have a predatory mind, Emilia," he told her one evening in March, a rare smile touching his lips. They were sitting by the fire, the tension of the day melting away. "It's a compliment." "It doesn't feel like one," she replied, smiling back. "But I suppose a predator is better than prey." It wasn't just business. Sullivan hired the best tutors in Europe. A retired French opera singer taught her voice control, how to lower her pitch to command authority. A fencing master taught her balance. And Mrs. Holloway, who had warmed to Emilia, taught her the most important lesson of all, the secrets of the aristocracy. "They all have skeletons, my dear," Mrs. Holloway whispered as she pinned Emilia's hair. "The Sterlings are broke." Lady Beatrice's father has a gambling addiction hidden by creative accounting. Knowledge is power. As the weeks passed, the dynamic between Emilia and Sullivan shifted. They were co-conspirators. They ate dinner together every night, discussing their war plans. Emilia began to see the man beneath the ruthless Duke. She saw how he anonymously paid for the orphanage in the East End. She saw how he treated his horses with more kindness than most men treated their wives. She saw the loneliness that he wore like a cloak. One stormy night in April, the thunder shook the house. Emilia found Sullivan in the conservatory, staring out at the rain. He looked haunted. "My sister," he said without turning, knowing it was her. "She was like you, gentle, kind. They ate her alive. I didn't save her." Emilia walked up to him. She didn't touch him, but she stood close enough that he could feel her warmth. "You saved me, Sullivan." He turned to look at her. The air between them crackled. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was a magnetic pull, terrifying and undeniable. For a moment, she thought he would kiss her. His gaze dropped to her lips, and his hand twitched at his side. But he pulled back. "You are ready," he said abruptly, his voice rough. "The season begins next week. The Duchess of Devonshire is hosting the spring gala. Everyone will be there, including them." "I'm ready," Emilia said, her voice steady. "Good. Because we are not just going as friends." Sullivan's eyes locked onto hers. "To make this work, to make you untouchable, we must be engaged." Emilia's breath hitched. "A fake engagement?" "A strategic alliance," he corrected. "Unless you find the idea repulsive?" "No," she said, perhaps too quickly. "Not repulsive." "Good." He nodded, turning back to the window. "Then let us prepare to burn their world down." The spring gala was the highlight of the London season. The ballroom of the Devonshire estate was a sea of pastel silks, ostrich feathers, and the drone of gossip. Beatrice Thorne held court near the fountain. She was laughing, clutching the arm of Julian Sterling. Julian looked thinner, more tired than he had in the winter. The rumors were that Beatrice was a demanding lover and an even worse creditor. She paraded him around like a pet dog. "Have you heard?" Beatrice tittered to her circle of sycophants. "The Duke of Ashcroft is coming tonight, and they say he's bringing a guest, probably some foreign princess he bought. Or perhaps he's finally come to his senses and realized he needs a wife with status," Julian suggested, taking a nervous sip of champagne. "Quiet, Julian," Beatrice snapped. "You speak when I tell you to." Suddenly, the music stopped. The chatter died down. The major domo struck his staff against the floor 3 times. "His Grace, the Duke of Ashcroft." Sullivan appeared at the top of the grand staircase. He looked magnificent in his stark black evening wear, a stark contrast to the colorful peacocks of the Tun. He looked down at the crowd with his usual boredom. And the announcer's voice wavered slightly. His fiancée, the future Duchess of Ashcroft, Miss Emilia Vance. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It was louder than the silence at the winter ball. Emilia stepped into the light. If she had looked like a victim in December, tonight she looked like a deity. She wore a gown of deep emerald velvet that hugged her figure, structured with gold embroidery that looked like armor. Her hair was swept up in an intricate, modern style, crowned with a diamond tiara that belonged to the Ashcroft collection, jewels that hadn't been seen in 50 years. But it wasn't the dress, it was her face. The fear was gone. Her chin was high, her eyes cool and amused. She looked at the crowd, not as if she sought their approval, but as if she were deciding whether or not to forgive them. She took Sullivan's hand. He kissed her knuckles, a gesture of public devotion that made the ladies swoon and the men jealous. They descended the stairs. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Beatrice Thorne dropped her glass. It shattered, red wine spilling onto her own white dress this time. Emilia walked straight toward them. Julian looked as if he had seen a ghost. His mouth hung open. He took a step forward, instinctively. "Ellie?" Emilia stopped. She looked at him. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She looked at him with the polite detachment one gives to a stranger. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice rich and cultured, the voice Sullivan had trained. "It has been a long time." You look," Julian stammered. "Expensive?" Emilia suggested archly. "Yes. It turns out my value was simply being appraised by the wrong buyer." "Emilia, please." Julian stepped closer, ignoring Beatrice's claw-like grip on his arm. "I made a mistake. Mr. Sterling." Sullivan interrupted, stepping between them. He towered over Julian. "You are speaking to my betrothed. I suggest you lower your eyes before I have you removed for harassment." Beatrice found her voice. "This is a farce," she shrieked, her face blotchy with rage. "She is a thief! She is a nobody! You can't marry her, Sullivan! She stole my ring!" The room went deadly silent. Everyone waited for Emilia to cry, to defend herself. Instead, Emilia laughed. It was a soft, genuine sound. "Oh, Lady Beatrice," Emilia said, shaking her head. "That old story? I think we both know the truth. But, speaking of theft..." Emilia turned to the crowd, raising her voice just enough. "Did you know, Lord Thorne, that your daughter has been using the family accounts to pay off Mr. Sterling's gambling debts in the East End? I believe the sum is upwards of £20,000 now." Lord Thorne, a red-faced man standing nearby, choked on his cigar. "What?" Beatrice went pale. "She lies!" "Do I?" Emilia signaled to a waiter, who handed her a small silver tray. On it was a stack of promissory notes. "Sullivan bought the debt this morning. It seems, Lady Beatrice, that you don't own Julian anymore. The Duke does, and by extension, I do." Emilia picked up the stack of debts. She looked at Julian, who was trembling. "You sold me for your debt, Julian," she said quietly. "Now I own you." She held the papers over a nearby candle. The flame caught the edge. The room watched in mesmerized horror as the debts, worth a fortune, turned to ash in her gloved hand. "Consider this my parting gift," Emilia said, dropping the burning paper to the floor. "I don't want your money, and I certainly don't want you. You are free, and you are nothing to me." She turned to Beatrice, who was now being berated by her furious father in front of the entire elite. "And you, Beatrice, you should get that wine stain looked at. It ruins the line of your dress." Emilia took Sullivan's arm. "I'm bored, darling. Shall we dance?" "We shall," Sullivan said, a look of fierce pride in his eyes. They swept onto the dance floor. As they waltzed, the world watched in awe. "You were terrifying," Sullivan whispered in her ear as he spun her. "I had a good teacher," she replied. "The debt, that was £20,000. You just burned it." "I told you." Emilia looked up at him. "I don't want him. I wanted to show them that I am above them. Was it too much?" Sullivan pulled her closer, his hand firm on her waist. "It was perfect, but we are not done yet." "No? No," he said darkly. "Humiliation is one thing. Ruin is another. Tomorrow the bank calls in the loans on the Thorne estate. By noon, they will be destitute." Emilia felt a shiver of fear but also excitement. "You are ruthless." "And you," he said, "are the Duchess." But as the night went on, something shifted. Julian was gone, fled in shame. Beatrice was gone. It was just Emilia and Sullivan. And as the waltz slowed, Emilia realized that the fake engagement felt dangerously real. She realized she didn't want him to let go when the music stopped. And judging by the way his thumb stroked the inside of her wrist, he didn't want to let go either. The week following the spring gala, London was in an uproar. The Thorne family was in financial ruin, their assets frozen by the Ashcroft banks. Julian Sterling had fled to the countryside, reportedly working as a clerk in a coal mine, a fitting end for a man who feared manual labor more than death. But inside Ashcroft Hall, the victory tasted like ash. Emilia sat in the Duke's study. She was no longer the mouse. She was the queen of the season. Invitations piled up on her desk. Teas, balls, opera boxes. Everyone wanted to know the woman who had tamed the Ruthless Duke. Yet Sullivan had grown distant. Since the night of the gala, he had retreated into his work. He spent long hours at his club, or locked in his office. The fake engagement was supposed to end once the revenge was complete, but neither had spoken of ending it. The silence was deafening. One rainy Tuesday, a visitor arrived. It was not a guest. It was Beatrice Thorne. She looked haggard, her dress simple, her eyes manic. She had forced her way past the footman. Emilia met her in the foyer. "You have some nerve coming here, Beatrice." "I have nothing left to lose," Beatrice spat. "You took my money, my reputation, my future, but I will not let you have him without knowing the truth." "Get out," Emilia said calmly. "Ask him!" Beatrice screamed, her voice echoing off the marble walls. "Ask your precious Duke why he chose you. Do you think it was a fairy tale? Do you think he saw a pretty girl and fell in love?" Beatrice pulled a crumpled, yellowed letter from her bodice and threw it at Emilia's feet. "Read it. It's a letter from his father, the late Duke, to his solicitor. 1878. Emilia hesitated, then bent down to pick it up. Her hands trembled. She read the scrawled handwriting. "The acquisition of the Vance solicitor firm is complete. We have crushed Vance. He is ruined. He has nothing left but his debts. I expect he will take the coward's way out by winter. The Vance girl will be destitute. Let her rot. It is just business." Emilia stopped breathing. The date was 2 weeks before her father had committed suicide. She looked up, her eyes filling with tears. His father? His father destroyed mine? Not just his father, Beatrice sneered, seeing the wound she had inflicted. Sullivan was 18 then. He was learning the business. He signed the papers, Emilia. He signed the order to foreclose on your father's home. Beatrice laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. He didn't save you because he loved you. He saved you because you are his guilt. You are his charity case. He has been paying off his conscience by dressing you up like a doll. Enough! The voice boomed from the top of the stairs. Sullivan stood there, his face pale, his eyes wild. He stormed down the stairs, seizing Beatrice by the arm. "Get her out of here!" he roared to the guards. Beatrice was dragged away, still laughing. "He killed your father, Emilia. Remember that when you lie in his bed." The heavy oak doors slammed shut, leaving Emilia and Sullivan alone in the silence. Emilia looked at the man she had started to love, the man she thought was her savior. "Is it true?" she whispered. "Did you sign the papers?" Sullivan didn't move. He didn't deny it. He looked like a man facing a firing squad. "I was 18, he said, his voice hollow. "I did what my father told me. I didn't know the consequences. I didn't know who Mr. Vance was. I only found out later, after he died, after I saw you in the library that day last summer." "So it was all a lie," Emilia said, the paper crumbling in her fist. "The kindness, the dresses, the protection. It wasn't affection. It was reparations." "Emilia, listen to me." Sullivan took a step forward. "No." She backed away. "I thought you saw me. I thought you were the only one who truly saw me. But you were just looking at a mistake you wanted to fix. I am not a person to you, Sullivan. I am a ledger entry you are trying to balance." "That is not true," Sullivan shouted, his control finally snapping. "Prove it," she screamed back, tears streaming down her face. "Let me go. The revenge is done. The thorns are ruined. Your debt to my father is paid. Let me go." Sullivan stared at her. His gray eyes were storms of pain. He opened his mouth to speak, to beg, but his pride, the iron armor he had worn for 10 years, slammed shut. "If that is what you wish," he said coldly, "you are free." Emilia turned and ran up the stairs. She packed only the gray wool dress she had arrived in. She left the jewels, the wide silks, and the ring on the bed. By midnight she was gone. The village of Oakhaven, nestled deep in the rugged hills of Yorkshire, was a place where time seemed to stand still. It was a world of gray slate roofs, bleating sheep, and biting winds that smelled of peat and rain. It was a universe away from the crystal chandeliers and velvet ballrooms of Mayfair, and that was exactly why Emilia Vance had chosen it. For 3 agonizing months, Emilia had lived here under the name Mrs. Hale, a widowed schoolteacher. She lived in a tiny stone cottage at the edge of the woods. Her hands, once adorned with the Ashcroft diamonds, were now rough from chopping wood and scrubbing floors. She taught the village children their letters and numbers, her voice soft and patient, hiding the steel that had once brought London's elite to their knees. Every night, she told herself she was free. She told herself she was better off without the complexity, the lies, and the crushing weight of the aristocracy. But the nights were the hardest. In the silence of her cottage, the ghost of Sullivan Blackwood haunted her. She didn't miss the wealth. She didn't miss the gowns. She missed the way he listened to her. She missed the late-night debates by the fire where he treated her mind like a treasure map. She missed the flicker of vulnerability in his icy gray eyes that only she was allowed to see. She hated him for what his family had done to hers, but she hated herself more for still loving the man who had signed the order. It was late August when the sky turned a bruised purple, threatening a storm. Emilia was in the small garden behind the schoolhouse, deadheading the dying summer roses. The air was heavy with the scent of upcoming rain and damp earth. Then she heard it. It wasn't the usual rattle of a farmer's cart. It was the heavy, rhythmic thunder of thoroughbred horses. The sound was out of place here, aggressive and demanding. Emilia froze, her shears hovering over a wilted bloom. She felt a magnetic pull in her chest, a physical sensation that made her breath hitch. It couldn't be. She turned slowly. A carriage had stopped at the low stone wall of the schoolyard. It was black, travel-stained and covered in mud, but the silver crest on the door was unmistakable, the Falcon of Ashcroft. The vehicle looked like a dark scar against the green pastoral landscape. The door opened. Emilia braced herself for the sight of the impeccable, arrogant Duke. She expected him to step out in pristine boots, looking down his nose at her rustic surroundings. But the man who stepped out was a stranger. Sullivan Blackwood looked like he had walked through hell. His signature black coat was wrinkled and dusted with road grit. His cravat was loose. He had lost weight. His cheekbones were sharp enough to cut, and there were deep, dark hollows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and tormented days. He hadn't shaved in at least 3 days, a shadow of dark stubble covering his jaw. He didn't look ruthless, he looked broken. He stood by the gate, gripping the iron bars as if they were the only thing holding him upright. He saw her, and for a moment, he simply breathed, his chest heaving as if he had run the entire distance from London. "You are hard to find, Emilia," he rasped. His voice was rough, stripped of its usual baritone command. "I didn't want to be found," Emilia replied, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound cold. She tightened her grip on the gardening shears. "Go away, Sullivan. There is nothing for you here." "I know," he said, pushing the gate open. It creaked loudly in the silence. "I know I have no right to be here. I know you hate me. And you are right to hate me." He walked toward her, his boots crunching on the gravel path. He stopped 5 feet away, respecting the invisible barrier she had erected. Up close, the damage was even more apparent. His eyes, usually so guarded, were wide open and filled with a raw, terrifying desperation. "Then why did you come?" Emilia demanded, tears pricking her eyes. "To mock me? To see the solicitor's daughter back in the dirt where you think she belongs?" "No," Sullivan whispered. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat. His hand shook. He pulled out a thick, folded document bound in blue ribbon. It wasn't a check. It wasn't a letter. "I came to give you this." He held it out. Emilia hesitated, then took it. She untied the ribbon and unfolded the parchment. Her eyes scanned the dense legal text. Her breath caught in her throat. It was a deed of transfer. "I, Sullivan Arthur Blackwood, Duke of Ashcroft, do hereby transfer all titles, lands, liquid assets, and holdings, including Ashcroft Hall, the London townhouse, the Sterling debts, and the Thorne estates, to Miss Emilia Vance." She looked up, stunned. "What is this?" "It is everything," Sullivan said, his voice devoid of emotion, like a man reading his own obituary. "I liquidated the accounts. I transferred the properties. It is all yours, Emilia. You are the wealthiest woman in England." "Are you mad?" she gasped. "This is millions of pounds. This is your legacy, your birthright." "My birthright is blood money," Sullivan said, stepping closer, his intensity returning. "You said I saw you as a ledger entry. You said I was just trying to balance a debt to clear my conscience. You were right." He fell to his knees. The sight of the Duke of Ashcroft, the most powerful man in the empire, kneeling in the mud of a schoolyard garden was so jarring that Emilia dropped. "The papers." "I cannot undo what my father did," Sullivan said, looking up at her, tears finally spilling over his lashes. "I cannot bring your father back, but I can pay the debt. If I give you everything I have, if I make myself a beggar and you a queen, then the ledger is balanced. I have nothing left. I am worth nothing." He reached out, tentatively, and took the hem of her simple cotton apron in his hand. "I didn't come here to buy you back, Emilia," he choked out. "I came to show you that I don't care about the title. I don't care about the empire. I hated my life until you walked into it. You were the only light in a house built of darkness. I love you. I love your mind, your anger, your kindness. I love you so much that I would rather live in a ditch with the memory of your smile than in a palace without you." Emilia looked down at him. She saw the truth written in the lines of pain on his face. She saw that he hadn't just signed a paper. He had destroyed his own identity to prove a point to her. He had stripped himself of the Ruthless Duke persona until only the man remained. She looked at the deed lying in the dirt. It represented power. It represented the ultimate revenge. She could take it. She could leave him here in the mud and go back to London as a conqueror. But as she looked at Sullivan, shivering, humbled, and completely hers, she realized that money was cold comfort compared to the fire in his eyes. "You foolish, foolish man," she whispered. She bent down and picked up the deed. Sullivan flinched, expecting her to walk away with it. Instead, Emilia took the thick parchment in both hands and ripped it down the middle. The sound of the tearing paper was louder than thunder. Sullivan froze. She ripped it again. And again. She tore the multi-million-pound fortune into confetti and threw the pieces into the wind. They fluttered down around them like expensive snow. "Emilia?" Sullivan gasped, his voice barely audible. "What have you done?" Emilia dropped to her knees in the dirt beside him. She grabbed his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "I don't want the Ashcroft fortune, Sullivan," she said fiercely. "I don't want the estates. I don't want the blood money." "Then what do you want?" he asked, trembling. "I want the man who stood up for me when the world laughed," she said, her thumb stroking his stubbled cheeks. "I want the man who read Plato with me by the fire. I want you. Just you, imperfect and broken, and mine." Sullivan let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest with a desperation that threatened to crack her ribs. He buried his face in her neck, breathing her in. "I am yours," he swore into her skin. "For every lifetime, I am yours." He pulled back and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It tasted of rain, salt tears, and a redemption that both of them had bled for. In that muddy garden, with the storm breaking above them, the past was finally washed away. Emilia and Sullivan were married 3 weeks later in the small village chapel of Oakhaven. There were no press, no aristocrats, and no pretenses. Just the villagers, Mrs. Halloway, who wept openly, and a love that had survived the fire. However, they did not stay in the shadows. They returned to London, not as the Duke in his charity case, but as partners. Since the deed was destroyed, Sullivan technically retained his assets, but under Emilia's influence, the Ashcroft empire changed. They became the leading reformers of the age, funding hospitals, schools, and changing labor laws. They were feared by the corrupt and adored by the poor. But stories like this demand balance. The universe does not let cruelty go unpunished. Lady Beatrice Thorne, the woman who had spilled wine on Emilia's dress and mocked her poverty, found that her own fall was far harder. After her father's bankruptcy, she was left with no dowry and a ruined reputation. Desperate to maintain any semblance of status, she accepted the only marriage proposal she received from a wealthy, brutal fish merchant named Silas Grimm. Silas was not a gentleman. He moved Beatrice to his trading post in the bleakest, coldest corner of Iceland. Letters that reached London years later described a woman who had aged 20 years and 5. Beatrice, who once refused to wear anything but silk, was seen daily on the docks, her hands cracked and bleeding from gutting cod, her once beautiful face hardened by the freezing wind. She lived in a drafty shack that smelled perpetually of fish guts, with a husband who mocked her tears just as she had once mocked Emilia's. She died alone, thousands of miles from the ballrooms she loved, remembered by no one. And then there was Julian Sterling. 5 years after their marriage, Emilia and Sullivan were leaving the Royal Opera House on a snowy Christmas Eve. They were wrapped in furs, laughing softly together, the picture of happiness and power. As they moved toward their carriage, a figure lunged out of the shadows. "My lord! My lady!" A penny for a veteran? The man was a skeleton wrapped in rags. His skin was gray, his teeth were gone, and one of his legs dragged behind him, the result of a mining accident in the coal pits, where he had been forced to work after fleeing his debts. Sullivan stepped forward protectively, but Emilia placed a gloved hand on his chest. "Wait," she said softly. She stepped closer to the beggar. The gaslight illuminated his face. It was Julian. He looked up, his eyes roomy and clouded. Recognition dawned slowly. He saw the woman in the emerald velvet coat, the diamonds glittering at her throat, the power radiating from her. He saw the mouse he had betrayed. "Emilia?" he croaked, his voice a ruin. "Ellie, is it you?" He scrambled forward, reaching out a filthy hand. "Ellie, please. I am starving. I have nothing." I made you. I found you. Please, help me." Sullivan tensed, ready to strike, but Emilia stood perfectly still. She looked at Julian with an expression not of anger, but of distant, cool pity. "You are mistaken," Emilia said, her voice clear and cutting as glass. "The woman you knew died in a ballroom 5 years ago. You killed her." "Please," Julian wept, falling into the snow. "Just a coin. Imagine if you were me." Emilia paused. She looked down at him, remembering the night he stood by while Beatrice humiliated her. She remembered his cowardice. "I do not need to imagine," Emilia said softly. "You once told me to imagine a life where I was nothing. You told me to learn my place. I think, Mr. Sterling, you have finally found yours." She turned away. "Come, Sullivan. The air here is toxic." Sullivan cast one last look of utter contempt at the shivering man in the snow, then took his wife's arm. They stepped into their warm, golden carriage. As the horses pulled away, leaving Julian Sterling weeping in the freezing gutter, Emilia did not look back. She rested her head on her husband's shoulder, and the ruthless Duke kissed her forehead, holding her tight as they rode home into the warmth of their forever. And that is the story of Emilia and Sullivan. It wasn't just a romance, it was a war. A war against poverty, against judgment, and against the belief that our past defines our future. Emilia proved that even when the world strips you of everything, your dignity, your money, your hope, you can still sew yourself a dress of steel and wear it like a queen. I want to ask you a question. If you found out the person you loved had a dark secret that connected to your own family's tragedy, could you forgive them? Or is some history too heavy to carry? This story reminds us that sometimes the ruthless people are just those who have been hurt the most, waiting for someone brave enough to heal them. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, redemption, and undying love, please hit the like button. It helps us so much. Share this video with a friend who needs to believe in happy endings, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Until next time, keep writing your own history.